because they just don't seem to wake up. Whether it's on foreign policy or economic policy or on personal liberties. I had an interview the other day, it was in Houston, and it was done by a person I consider an ultra-conservative, not libertarian. So we did a little interview on TV, and his biggest beef, and one of the things he really wanted to talk about, was the stupidity of the drug war. And I thought, well, this is great. He all of a sudden realized, and it used to be that, oh, you know, if you're conservative, you can't suggest that there's been some intimidation with the drug war. And yet, all of a sudden, you know, people are starting to talk about this. You know, if the people weren't way ahead of the Congress in Washington on this, I couldn't possibly have been elected. Because, you know, both Republicans and Democrats each spent over $1 million apiece when I was trying to run for Congress in '96, when I came back. They spent money, and the main attack was, you know, he doesn't even believe in the federal war on drugs. But you know what? The people listened to my explanation, and I said, well, I can't stand the drugs, and I don't like this, but I care about civil liberties, and I think the war on drugs is a lot worse than the drugs themselves. But people responded in a positive way. And I think that's what's happening today. I think they're going to respond and are currently responding to finally hear somebody say, you know, we don't have to go to war continuously, and we don't have to bleed. There are other options. We can actually talk to people, and we can actually say to the world, you know what? We don't have to threaten Iran with a nuclear first strike. There's opportunity because in the near future, we may face more problems in the close sense. And that is, if financially we get into difficulties, much more so than we are today, I think the underpinnings of our economic system have been eroded. But let's say we do have a dollar crisis and we can't afford our empire. That's usually the way empires end. It wasn't us forcing the Soviets to build missiles that brought them to their knees. It was the fact that socialism doesn't work. Well, our system doesn't work much better because we have a welfare system that's verging on a socialist system, and we're spending beyond our means, so it will end. So when and if that comes, if we continue to do the work that we're doing and be in place of these young people will be in position to have an influence on our government, by then the government then will reflect our views. And our views are becoming more popular. I don't believe you will ever get to the point where you will gradually educate the congressman or get enough people in there to exactly reflect these views and then change the country. I don't think it works that way. It has to work by changing people's attitudes. The government we get is the government that we ask for. And right now, I see a tremendous opportunity for the views of liberty and to restore the Constitution, to restore the ideas of limited government, to restore the notion that markets work well, and that's how we can take care of people. You know, how many candidates now are jumping on the bandwagon about national health care? You know, in the last 30 years, essentially, government's been involved, or even longer, the government's been involved in national health care. It keeps going downhill. It costs more money, less people have access to it, and the costs are skyrocketing. So every time this is noticed, they say, well, we need more government. Has it ever dawned on them that possibly we have some flaws in our medical system because the government's involved in the medical system and we need to get the government out of the medical care system? Same way in education. We have a public school system that worked rather well when it was local, and local school boards took care of it. It was not unconstitutional to do that, and local governments handled that, and we sort of survived it all. But now, what do? We even in the Republican Party, they used to have presidents run and say, we want to get rid of the Department of Education. Oh, but now what we do, we get Republicans in, we get control of the House, we get control of the Senate, and we double the size of the Department of Education. And then they wonder why the quality of education goes down. To me, the most important thing in our efforts is to understand how important individual liberty is. So many people come up and we'll get questions, and quite possibly even on Tuesday, we'll get questions and say, well, what do you think about this group's rights, minority rights, gay marriage, all these things? And you know, as far as I'm concerned, as far as all of us should be concerned, is, you know, we don't have to worry about that. What we should worry about is individual rights. Everybody has a right to their life and a right to their liberty. And we should recognize that the purpose of government not only is to protect liberty, but it ought to really emphasize the protection of your individual privacy. Unfortunately, today, government is designed to invade your privacy and protect the secrecy of government, and we need to turn that around. I'm convinced if we're to have a non-interventionist foreign policy, a non-interventionist policy on our personal liberties, and one in economics, we first have to get the majority of the people to endorse these views as they're being in their best interest to do so. That, I believe, is coming. There's every reason to recognize that individual liberty is something that we cherish, something that we have had a taste of, something our country has benefited from, and something that we may lose if we're not careful. But our numbers are growing. There's reasons not to be despondent. I think we are so much better off than the Soviet system and the Russians and other countries. When they collapsed, they did not have the same traditions about private property ownership and limited government. We have at least a history of that. And this is the reason that I'm more optimistic that even in the midst of a crisis, we should come out of this much better. But in the meantime, if we want to do a good job, I think the immediate thing that we ought to do is have a president that probably the day after he's sworn in, that he would say, at least in Iraq, no more patrolling the streets of Iraq, no more playing policeman. And probably on that very same day, that president could send out an order to turn the Navy around, get them out of the Persian Gulf, bring them away from Iran. And then tell the American people that they ought to think about everything that we have done around the world over these many, many decades. We ought to look at it as if somebody else had done it to us. What if the Chinese had their Navy in the Gulf of Mexico? And what if they had troops on our soil? How would we react? Do you think we would take advantage of our Second Amendment and do a little shooting? But it's only with that understanding that the American people will realize the reason that we came home. Today we're taught, our people are taught, that if we leave, that means we are giving up, surrendering, and that this is a sign of weakness. Well, I don't know. It seems to me that a sign of strength might be the willingness to admit a mistake, that we went in the wrong direction, and that we change our direction and do the right thing. The efforts that we make here in the next few months in the campaign, I think, can be very critical. We can rally a lot of troops. What will come of it, I do not know. All I know is that things are going well, better than I ever dreamed of, and it is, to me, very encouraging to know that the numbers are out there. The remnant is much bigger than I ever dreamed. And this is wonderful, and this is very encouraging. It should encourage all of us to continue our work and effort. And there are some. And some of my best friends think that politics aren't worth the effort. But education, as far as I'm concerned, is the most important. Some will work just in education, some will work in politics, and some will work in both, and some will always make the effort. But ultimately, the true test is changing the people's mind, to be convinced that America has been a great nation, we can be a great nation, but the emphasis always has to be on the protection and the emphasis on individual liberty. I thank you very much.